Miss Thompson, what were your first impressions on arriving at Coton Court as a young girl in 1928?
Well, I had been engaged to come to Coton Court and to be a young lady's maid to Lady Throckmorton and her two daughters. And I arrived at Coton Station. We had a railway station then, and was met by the groom, Mr. Green, who put my baggage on the cart, and they always had the pony cart too.
Oh yes.
And I was terrified the horse would run away with me while he was putting my luggage on. And we proceeded down Sanborn Lane. I thought it was very beautiful. And then we came in sight of this tall, stately home, and had a beautiful avenue of elm trees. And I thought, dear me, I don't think I'm good enough for that place. It's too grand. And I arrived and was met by the butler, Mr. Wells, who took me to the housekeeper's room and received by Mrs. McPhee, the housekeeper, very nice person, Scottish she was.
Oh, yes.
And of course she was Miss McPhee really, but of course if you were a housekeeper in those days you had to be Mrs.
Oh.
And she gave me some tea. And as I had travelled all the way from Northumberland, she had included a boiled egg. And when the kitchen maid came in with a boiled egg, and I was very grateful for, but I'll never forget that boiled egg because it hadn't been boiled enough and it was very runny. And to make matters worse, she had these sort of bone spoons which she always used for eggs for breakfast when we had breakfast, and it kept slipping off, and that was really very difficult to eat that egg. That was my first impression.
You were a bit embarrassed.
And then Lady Throckmorton and her family had been to London for the season. She used to have a mother's house in the Belgravia part of London, and they were expected the next day. And so I'd been told that there were a staff of 12 indoor servants, and I was shown to my room, and I had a workroom with a bedroom adjoining. And I thought, well, it was as quiet, you could hear a pin drop. And I thought, well, if there's 12 indoor staff here, I wonder where they are. But the next day was the great day when I met Lady Throckmorton, and I was called down the stairs, and there I saw this tall, handsome lady, all in her London clothes, looking so smart, and I thought, dear Lord, how shall I ever make clothes for that smart lady? And she was very kind. She said, come along now, we'll unpack. And so began my busy and very happy life at Coton Court. And life was sort of, she took me to unpack her things, which were beautifully packed, and we hung them up, she always aired them, and they had to be pressed and everything. And then her daughter came the same time, the youngest daughter, who was 16 years old then, the Baroness, who's now the Baroness, Miss Anne. She had two daughters, Miss Betty, who was the mother of the present Mrs. Throckmorton, and Miss Anne, who is now the present Baroness, who lives in Coton. And unpacking her things, it was quite a different thing. Her dispatch box, as she called it, seemed to me to be full of rubbish she used at that age. Her clothes were all right. And so began the life, and I thought, well, the first impression I had when I did meet the staff was the home I'd left in Northumberland, in tears, but it was my fault, I wanted to. I had this great ambition to see life elsewhere. I had done dressmaking, but in the north at that time there had been the general strike, and people were very poor, and you didn't get hardly anything for dressmaking. And even my mother, who never wanted me to leave home, she agreed. But I loved them all very much. It wasn't because I was unhappy at home, because I was very happy. And there was a lovely atmosphere. Strange to say, the same atmosphere as my very humble home I came from was the same as the atmosphere here. because there was a wonderful staff of old retainers, faithful retainers. And Lady Throckmorton was as loyal to us as we were to her, which made a great bond. And of course, that staff, some of the staff, came from Buckland in Berkshire.
Oh, yes.
And they did serve Sir William Throckmorton, who died in 1919.
Yes.
And in 1910, Sir William, who had let this house to Mr. Andrews for some years, Mr. Andrews died, he decided to sell Buckland. Buckland House in Berkshire and Harvington Hall in the Midlands came into the family through the marriage of Mary Yates to Sir Robert Throckmorton, the third baronet.
Oh, yes.
And so they've both gone those now. Well, then Sir William decided to come to Coulton. Now, he had to first of all get the house in order. A lot of work had to be done. And the interesting thing at that date was that the saloon, which when the Catholics were again given the rights to have Mass said, the church next to the house was built by the Throckmortons and taken from them at the Reformation. It's now the parish church, Protestant. And so they had turned the saloon into a chapel.
Yes.
And the walls were covered with a red hessian with the fleur-de-lis on it in black. And there were bits of that material in the house and the past that I've seen.
That's interesting.
And the alcoves in the corner, which you see, had been closed in, and that was the sacristy where the priest robed and everything.
Yes, of course.
And he changed, so he made the saloon as it was, as it is today. And that is why near those alcoves you'll see 1910, and people have come to me and said, was this room built in 1910 then? But the room, it was the restoration of the saloon to its former use.
Yes.
And of course, when Sir William came here, he brought with him some faithful servants. He brought his very portly, very dignified butler. And if you ever remember, his name was Arthur Palmer, Mr. Palmer. And he, if you ever remember that picture of Andrew's liver salts, with that portly figure, that was exactly Mr. Palmer.
Was it indeed?
And he brought with him his two footmen, Mr. Charles Wells and Harry Mildenall, his footman. And of course he had two footmen. They had two footmen in Buckland and a hall boy, but here they only needed one. So Harry Mildenall, he took a job in the garden with the head gardener, Mr. Matthews. And then also from Buckland came that wonderful groom, Mr. Green. I've forgotten his first name. When I came here, the Throckmortons are very particular. Everyone was given a proper name. You know, there's no... Everybody has their Christian names now. You don't know who they're talking about.
Yes.
But it was very, very proper. And so I think I did hear Mr. Green's first name, but he was just like out of a storybook. Very Victorian, a charming man. And if you caught him with his eyes, tears come down his cheek one day, it was because the horse wasn't well. He was a very nice man.
He loved the horses.
He loved the horses. And so began my life at Coulton. And of course, the first thing was I was taken to Stratford. The chauffeur drove us to Stratford with the young ladies, and they chose some material for dresses, which I was to make up. And now they didn't tell me whether they liked them or not, but my wage was, which I was engaged at so much a year, it turned out it was 13 threepence a week.
A week?
It was immediately raised to 15 shillings, so I knew I'd made it. And so began my life. Now, the first Christmas I came here, I had never seen a big Christmas that they used to have when the family used to dress up and do a play for all the tenants. You must remember that in those days there was a huge outdoor staff because the estate, you see, belonged to them, all the ground.
Yes.
And they had state workmen and different people in dear little George Smith, who I really loved him. He lived at the other side of the archway in that house there. And he was a wonderful little man. And he used to have cows. And two, I'll tell you, talking of the staff, I must include Miss Annie and Miss Fanny Brooks, who were really Colton people. But Miss Annie Brooks was in charge of the lodge. And of course the gates were always kept shut there, and they didn't use, only the family used the main entrance.
Oh, yes. Mm.
And if anybody of importance, like when Mr. Bernard Shaw came, he used to come over with Sir Barry Jackson. The chauffeur would go down Warner that they were coming. And Miss Fanny Brooks was the dairymaid. She was quite elderly, I might tell you.
Yes.
And she used to feed the chickens. And George Smith used to milk the cows, and she used to make the butter and do all sorts of things like that. But they were very quaint, very wonderful people, great characters in the village.
Was the family self-supporting as far as food went? You mentioned butter and milk.
Yes, the butter and milk, and we had at the post office, there was a wonderful family called Mr. Parks' family that had been there for years. They used to make the bread.
Oh, yes.
They made the bread, they had a farm, they supplied the coal, they did everything. It was well set up, you know. And then the shops were always, all the food was bought from the local shops.
That would be in Ulster, would it?
In Ulster, yes. And of course Mr. Parks. They bought everything from Mr. Parks, the post office, except the special cheeses and special things which came from Ulster, which had a very good shop named Bunting's, who supplied marvellous cheese and bacon and pork and things like that. And then came the first Christmas. So we had a very ordinary Christmas because of the great event which was to occur in February of the following year, 1929. On the 15th of February, the present baronet became, it was his coming of age. Now, we never realised at the time, but we were seeing passing history.
That would be Sir Robert, of course.
Sir Robert.
Yes.
And it was really marvellous then. The event took place every day in this week, in the week of his birthday. There was a different luncheon for the tradespeople, the farmers, the tenants, all. Then on the Friday, the day of his birthday, at 6 o'clock in the morning, the church bells rang out for his birthday, and again at 12 o'clock midday, and then again at 6 o'clock in the evening. And that evening, the family themselves had their own friends to a big dinner party in the dining room. And after that, we had this wonderful ball in the saloon.
How marvellous.
And it was really lovely. And I always remember Sir Robert going up to Miss Fanny Brooks and asking her for a dance. They were both up to here in lace, you know. I mean, they were lovely. And of course but she was very flattered.
Yes, yes.
And then the housekeeper, Mrs. McPhee, had made him a beautiful 3-tier birthday cake. And it was a wonderful evening. And the young ladies gave me quite a few nice dresses a week or two beforehand. And the maids all came up to my workroom, and they chose a dress to wear for the ball, because everyone was invited, which I thought was so nice. And so it was very, very nice. And then on the Saturday, the children from the school of Throckmorton, which is in Worcestershire, they came in to tea and had tea with the children of Colton School, with the Punch and Judy show after. So that was a great event. And then, of course, the next thing that year for me was that the youngest daughter, Miss Anne, was to be presented at court. And of course I was very busy dressmaking, lining their court trains, everything with silver and pink, and Her Ladyship's court train with gold, all gold. And that was great excitement, to me anyway, because we went to London for it.